They thought killing a gang member would keep the streets quiet. What they forgot was who really ran the city. When 19-year-old Dre Lil Ghost Taylor, a low-level runner for the Southside Phantoms, was gunned down by police during what they called a routine traffic stop, the department wasted no time labeling it justified. According to the official report, Dre had a gun. But there were no body cams, no dash cam footage, just the word of two officers and a lifeless teen slumped behind the wheel. But on the streets, Dre wasn't just some corner boy. He was family, blood, and the Phantoms don't let family fall without retribution. For years, the police ruled through intimidation, planting evidence, shaking down black teens, making people disappear. But what they didn't realize was that this crew didn't fear them. Not anymore. The Southside Phantoms were ruthless. The cops thought they were in charge, until one officer turned up bound and beaten beneath an overpass. Another vanished on his drive home. A third was exposed for planting evidence in over 30 arrests. The city's foundation began to crack. The department unraveled from within. And in every precinct, one question echoed louder each day. Who's next? This is the story of a gang that lost one of its own and declared war on a system that thought it could kill without consequence. Welcome to Crime Corner. Subscribe and hit the bell icon. Because this isn't just a story. It's a warning. Westside Detroit doesn't do silence. Even at midnight, the streets breathe. Engines rumble. Dogs bark in the distance. Fast lines pulse from passing cars. Streetlights flicker like they're tired of staying lit. Beneath one of those flickering lamps, an old blue Crown Vic eased to a stop. The left taillight blinked weakly, cracked, and almost gone. Inside sat Dre Taylor, 19, hoodie up, music low, chili fries in the passenger seat, just trying to make a home. They called him Lil Ghost, not because he was violent, but because he moved through life quiet, never in the spotlight, always in the shadows. A low-level phantom, ran errands, kept his head down, kept his hands cleaner than most. That night, all he wanted was dinner and peace. But the red and blue lights flared behind him, bright, fast, aggressive. Too fast for a busted taillight. Two officers jumped out. One flanked left, the other right. Flashlights already in hand. Hands hovering over their guns. Dre did what he was taught. Hands on the wheel. No sudden moves. Eyes forward. That's the script they give you when you're black in Detroit. Don't run. Don't argue. Don't reach. Just survive. But survival wasn't in the cards. The dash cam? Not working. The body cams? Not recording. The only thing left was noise, raised voices, a scuffle, then two quick gunshots. Final. Irreversible. The fries never left the seat. One of Dre's sneakers was still under the pedal. His body spilled halfway out the door like a marionette with its strings cut. Blood pooled around him, thick and quiet. The officers kept shouting commands at a corpse, like that would cover what they'd done. The radio call came through cold and rehearsed. Officer involved. Suspect reached. Feared for safety. No witnesses. No evidence. Nothing that couldn't be edited behind closed doors. By the time backup arrived, it was over. Police tape went up. Fire hoses came out. They scrubbed the asphalt like it could wash away the truth. News reports echoed the same sanitized headline. Teen shot during routine traffic stop. No name. No photo. No mention of the officer's past misconduct. No outrage. But the neighborhood knew better. The whispers began before the blood dried. Phones buzzed. Hands passed notes. No screenshots. No hashtags. Just one name. Dre. And from that name came a storm. Ghost wasn't a kingpin. He didn't run the block or bark orders from behind tinted glass. But he had people. And his people, they had someone else. Reap. Dre's older brother. The quiet one in clean clothes, even in dirty rooms. The one who shook hands with pastors and vanished before the sirens reached the corner. He didn't need to be loud. That wasn't his way. So when he found out, he didn't scream, didn't shed a tear. He just went still. And in a city like this, silence like that is louder than gunshots. Because when someone like Reap goes quiet, something terrible is about to speak. He didn't answer the first call. He was upstairs in his apartment, top floor of the South Side projects, watching over 3 neighborhood kids. One was nodding off on the couch. Another was stuck on a math problem. The third was getting wrecked in a game of chess. Reap moved a knight, checked the boy's king, and glanced at his buzzing phone. Unknown number. No voicemail. Then another buzz, different number, same block. This one he answered. No one said the words. They didn't have to. The silence on the line said it all. And when the name Ghost came up, Reap's jaw locked just once before his voice dropped into that low tone only his crew knew. For words. We moving. Right now. Click. The line went dead. The chessboard was left flipped, homework abandoned. Reap stood up, shrugged on his coat, and walked out without saying goodbye. The kids didn't ask. They understood. The streets had taught them how to read shifts in the wind. And this wind carried blades. Outside, the neighborhood was frozen. Word had already spread, but not loudly. No yelling, no chaos. Not like other shootings. Because this wasn't a turf war. It wasn't random. Ghost hadn't carried a weapon. He had no record, no threat, no reason to die, except that he was a black boy in a hoodie. Reap moved through the building like smoke, silent but felt. Doors cracked open as he passed, then quietly shut. The old heads gave him solemn nods. The young ones watched him like a legend come alive. By the time his boots hit the sidewalk, the crew was already waiting. No greetings, no hugs, just presence. They didn't need colors or hand signs. Everyone already knew who they were. The Southside Phantoms had rules. You don't move loud until it's time. And the clock just struck. One by one, cars pulled up, windows down, radios off. No bass, no bark, just silence wrapped in steel and glass. Reap climbed into the lead car, rolled the window halfway down. Still no words. No cries. No vengeance speech. He just stared ahead, eyes hollow like he'd left his soul in another room. But inside, his mind was turning over every quiet memory of Dre. Not the holidays, not the birthdays, the small things. Like when Dre gave his lunch to a homeless vet without saying a word. Or when he'd walk the long way home just to avoid crossing enemy turf, just to keep peace. Dre didn't flex, didn't pick fights, didn't raise his voice. That's why they called him Ghost. And now, that name fit too well. Reap knew how the game worked. Knew cops got shielded. Knew how internal investigations turned into closed doors and buried truths. Knew protests faded once the cameras blinked away. That's why he wouldn't be protesting. Not this time. He didn't come a chant. He came a move. The convoy rolled out slow and steady. No horns. No screeching tires. Just a line of cold purpose sliding into the night. A few blocks away, stoops started to fill. People gathered in silence, reading the sky. Mothers gripped their kids tighter. Old heads lit cigarettes with shaky fingers. They all knew. Something was coming. Something that wouldn't be undone. Detroit was shifting. And at the center of that shift stood a man who had just buried the last piece of his soul beneath a streetlight on Alton Avenue. Whatever was coming next had nothing to do with justice. This was about balance. And the streets? They always collect their debts. The church filled quickly, not just with family and friends, but with a silence that didn't belong in a house of God. It wasn't sorrowful. It didn't shake or sigh. It just sat thick, still, and heavy, waiting. People wore black, but the glint of gold stitched into phantom jackets said more than mourning ever could. This wasn't grief. It was preparation. Dre's casket sat closed at the altar. His mother had insisted on it. She couldn't face what they'd done to her baby's face. Couldn't bear the thought of her son lying cold under fluorescent lights while someone ticked boxes on a form. She sat in the front row, one hand clutched around Reap's wrist, not to comfort him, but to keep herself grounded, like she might float away if she let go. The police didn't dare step inside. No uniforms. Just plainclothes officers with clipboards and earpieces lingering across the street near unmarked squad cars, watching through tinted glass. Their presence didn't feel safe. It felt like a dare. The pastor spoke briefly. He talked about peace, about healing, but no one really heard him. Not with a fresh wound still bleeding in every chest. The name Dre Taylor wasn't whispered with tenderness. It pounded through the church like a drumbeat, like a warning. Then Reap stood. No introduction, no nod. He just rose and walked toward the podium, slow and deliberate. Every step carried weight, like he was dragging something heavy behind him, like grief itself had mass. He didn't clear his throat, didn't stumble, didn't cry. He looked out at the faces in the pews, at the phantoms dressed in tailored suits, at mothers squeezing crumpled tissues, at the kids wearing Dre's name scrawled across their sneakers in black Sharpie. And then he spoke. "You didn't just kill my brother," he said, his voice low and flat. "You declared war." That was it. No yelling, no threats, just 5 quiet words that shattered every fragile thread of peace still hanging in the air. A silence deeper than before settled over the church. Not a cough, not a murmur. Then he turned and walked away. No explanation, no emotion, just that line, enough to light a fuse that had been waiting for a spark. Outside, the media swarmed like hornets. Microphones jabbed into tear-streaked faces. News vans hovered like vultures. But no one gave them anything. Not a word. Not a sound. Not when something far bigger was forming behind clenched jaws and tear-glazed eyes. That night, a video from the funeral began to circulate. Not the church's live stream or a press clip. A grainy cell phone recording taken from the back balcony. It showed Reap standing at the pulpit, delivering that line, then fading into the shadows like he was never there. It spread fast. To the phantoms. To rival crews. To every street kid who knew Ghost or knew what he stood for. The video didn't just say Dre was dead. It said he was taken, and someone was going to pay. Detroit hadn't realized it yet, but everything had already changed. The police made their move. And now, the streets were ready to respond. 2 weeks passed. No arrests. No suspensions. No answers. Just a stiff press conference held in a washed-out room beneath flickering fluorescent lights. The city seal hung crooked behind the podium. The police spokesperson read the statement like it was a forecast. Cold. Unmoved. But outside that room, the storm had already started. And this time, it wasn't going to blow over. Calm. Rehearsed. Unbothered. That was the tone at the department's internal review. According to the official statement, the officers feared for their safety when Dre Taylor made a sudden movement. The report mentioned a possible reach toward the glove compartment. No mention of missing body cam footage. No follow-up questions allowed. Just a stiff nod, a blank stare, and a quiet exit. Outside, the crowd barely stirred. They'd heard it all before. Same script. Same tired pauses. The same excuse that managed to land every time. Even when the blood was still drying on pavement, and there wasn't a weapon in sight. A few protesters gathered near the station gates. Some held signs. Others chanted Dre's name through cracked voices and fading hope. One man shouted into a bullhorn, demanding justice. But the crowd was thin. Hope didn't last long in places like this. And when justice did come, it never wore a badge. Across the city, news anchors delivered the story with solemn faces, followed by weather reports and traffic delays. Within 48 hours, Dre's name had vanished from the headlines. But in the South Side, it was just beginning. Reap didn't show up at the protests. No signs. No hashtags. No interviews or candlelight vigils. He stayed in the shadows, watching from the back seat of a parked car, behind rusted fences, from rooftops that looked down on the city like a silent judge. He wasn't hoping. He was planning. And in that silence, something started to form. Not rage. Worse. Precision. Reap understood how the system worked. It didn't bow to tears or chance. It bent to leverage, to pressure, to exposure. If the city thought it erased Ray with a press release and a few sanitized lines of legalese, it underestimated the man it had just provoked. The phantoms were paying attention. Rival crews went quiet. Even the cops, hardened, armored, arrogant, shifted their patrol routes. Less eye contact, faster drive-bys, heavier backup. Not because anything had happened yet, but because something was coming. The air felt brittle, like glass about to crack. And Reap? He didn't crack. He built, piece by piece, street by street, face by face. He didn't call for heat. He called for silence. No chaos. No sloppy moves. No turf drama. Not yet. When a younger phantom suggested torching a cop car, Reap didn't yell. He just stared, and the kid sat down. This wasn't going to be a reaction. This was going to be a reckoning, one the city would feel in its bones. They had watched a boy die for nothing. Now, they were watching a shadow move with intent, slipping through the cracks the system thought it had sealed. The cops may have buried Dre, but Reap had unearthed something they couldn't bury again. The warehouse was cold, silent, and stripped of anything that could be traced. No phones, no cameras, no signals, just steel beams and stained concrete. The kind of place meant to be forgotten. They came at midnight, one car at a time. Lights off, engines hushed. Not everyone was Phantom. Some came from old crews, long-retired sets, people who didn't normally cross boundaries. But this wasn't about turf anymore. It was about message. Inside, they stood in a circle. Some leaned against the walls. Others crossed their arms, quiet but alert. Everyone understood why they were there. No one spoke, until Reap stepped forward. He didn't take center stage, didn't raise his voice. He just laid it out, calm and calculated. This wasn't going to be war like they used to do it. No drive-bys, no reckless hits, no flashy headlines that led nowhere. Reap had seen enough funerals, too many murals, too many names turned into hashtags. And this time, it wasn't going to end with paint on a wall. This time, they were going to cut deeper. They'd make the city bleed in a place it couldn't hide or patch up with press conferences. The targets were already chosen. Names, faces, routines etched into memory. Officer Briggs, the one who pulled the trigger. Officer Daniels, his backup. Detective Walters, with a record stacked high, with dirty stops and crooked paperwork. Lieutenant McNeil, the one who rubber-stamped it all without a second look. But this wasn't about revenge. Reap made that clear. This was about exposure. Make them visible. Drag them out from behind their shields, their silence, their badges. Because that's what real power fears most, being seen. No one clapped. No one cheered. The room stayed silent, but the air buzzed low, like something was charging beneath the concrete. That subtle pressure before the sky cracks open. Reap laid out the plan with surgical precision. Roles were assigned. Lookouts, drivers, cleaners, tech ops. Everyone had a piece of the puzzle, never more than they needed. No solo missions. No cowboy moves. No ego. No one acted alone. No posts. No glory-seeking. This wasn't a war for show. It was going to be clean, quiet, devastating, surgical, Reap said, and when he said it, every head in the room nodded. This wasn't about spraying bullets in the dark. This was scalpel work, done in daylight, where everyone could see, but no one could stop it. At the edge of the room stood Tasha, hoodie up, fingers flying across a glowing keyboard. She didn't say much, but her code spoke volumes. For weeks, she'd been monitoring police frequencies, tracking city infrastructure, digging into off-duty schedules and burner phone habits. She had blueprints of their lives, where they slept, where they drank, what lies they texted under fake names. Everything was in place. Now it was time to move. There was no final speech, no raised fists, just a quiet look from Reap that circled the room like a command. Everyone there understood. This wasn't about looking tough. It was about being undeniable. As they slipped out, one by one, engines sparked to life in the distance. Low rumbles echoing like war drums under the night sky. Outside, the city slept. Sirens cried faintly in the background. A helicopter traced lazy circles above blocks of boarded windows and restless mothers. One of those nights where nothing seems to happen, but everything changes. The phantoms didn't light up timelines. They didn't chant in the streets. They didn't talk to reporters. But the city was about to hear them. And it would be a sound no one would forget. Officer Briggs never made it home. He clocked out just after midnight. Routine shift through Midtown. Swung by a 24-hour diner. Black coffee. Turkey melt. Said nothing to the cashier. Briggs was the type who thought unreadable meant untouchable. Blank face. Flat tone. Like armor. The diner's outdoor cam caught his cruiser turning left onto West Burnside. That was the last trace of him. At 2:06 a.m., his vehicle was found idling on the shoulder of a service road outside city limits. Driver's door hanging open. Engine running. Headlights spilling into the dark. The radio? Silent. Briggs was gone. The first responder crept up slowly, hand resting on his weapon, calling out. Only wind answered back. No struggle, no blood, no shattered glass, no shell casings, just a car, and on the driver's seat, a single item, a phantom bandana, black, edged with gold, folded neatly, placed like an offering, or a warning. When dispatch got the report, there was a beat of silence. Not protocol, just instinct, because everyone in that room understood exactly what that bandana meant. This wasn't random. This wasn't rage. This was the start of something designed. By sunrise, helicopters buzzed the scene. 9 units scoured the woods. Reporters stood behind yellow tape with gray voices reserved only for officer-down stories. But all they had was a car, a symbol, and a missing name. No blood, no body, no Briggs. The department issued a press release within hours. They called it a missing persons case, urgent, active, and under intense investigation. They asked for the community's cooperation. They promised swift action. The irony hit hard. When Dre was killed, it took them 3 days just to release his name. Now, with the man who pulled the trigger gone, the sirens hadn't stopped since. The streets were watching, not with rage, this time with curiosity, because now it felt real. No threats, no graffiti tags, no grainy mass confessionals. Just a cop, vanished. No sound, no struggle, no trace. And the city felt it in its bones. The balance had shifted. For the first time in a long time, fear didn't roll downhill. It crept upward. Inside police stations, the usual chatter dropped to murmurs. Officers glanced over their shoulders more often. Patrols doubled up, even in neighborhoods they once considered safe. Some parked their cruisers near churches or fire stations, basking in streetlight halos like holy ground might save them. No one said it out loud. They didn't need to. Someone out there was playing by a different rulebook, and they were winning. Reap didn't celebrate. He didn't need to. The message had landed exactly as intended. Loud without chaos, sharp without spectacle. One man gone, one symbol left behind. A precision strike that told the system, we see you. And this is only the beginning. The phantoms laid low. No bravado. No online breadcrumbs. No slip-ups. Because this wasn't about pride. It was about discipline. The streets had once whispered Dre's name in hushed tones of grief. Now the system whispered Briggs's in fear. And somewhere in the shadows, Reap was already studying the next name on his list. Officer Daniels was found just before sunrise. A long-haul trucker spotted him, suspended beneath the I-96 overpass, zip-tied to a rusted steel beam, blindfolded, unharmed, no bruises, no blood, no broken bones, just a shaking man, a badge still clipped to his belt, his breath visible in the cold morning air. Behind him, in bold red strokes across the concrete, for DRE, phantoms. There was no subtlety. There wasn't supposed to be. The news broke within the hour. Aerial footage from a circling chopper hit the internet before Daniels even reached the hospital. It exploded online, hashtags trending, theories swirling, remix edits rolling out like trailers. Some called it gang warfare. Others whispered vigilante justice. But nobody missed the message. Twice now, the city's power structure had been rattled. And this time, the target lived to talk about it, barely. Daniels said little. Shaky hands, dry mouth, 1,000-yard stare. He couldn't recall much. Claimed he was taken outside his gym. Hood over his head. Tossed into a car, blasting gospel music at full volume. No one spoke. No threats. No voices. Just silence. Until the blindfold came off, and he saw the message painted behind him. Then they left. Alive. Terrified. Exposed. The department scrambled. Emergency meetings were called. Precincts tightened security. Off-duty officers were warned not to travel alone. Uniforms were swapped for plain clothes. Patrol routes were redrawn. But none of it mattered. The message had already sunk in. This wasn't random. It was curated. A manifesto written in action, not words. A statement made in flesh and red paint. Proof that the phantoms weren't flailing in fury. They were executing a plan, clean, surgical, deliberate. And the most chilling part? Not a single civilian had been harmed. No shootouts. No bystanders. Just targets in uniform who thought their badges made them untouchable. That afternoon, the mayor held a press conference. He called for calm, for unity. He condemned the attacks and pledged swift consequences. But halfway through his speech, his voice cracked. And though he recovered, everyone watching knew this city was no longer under control. The cameras caught it, a blink too fast, a twitch in the jaw. Not from rage, but from fear. Because what happens when the streets begin to organize with more discipline, more structure, than the very departments sworn to control them? You panic, and the city was panicking. Meanwhile, Reap remained invisible, not hiding, just watching. Observing from a distance while the city turned itself inside out, scrambling to prepare for a storm that had already passed through its walls. He watched the news coverage with the sound off. The talking heads didn't matter. The point had already landed. Sure, Daniel survived, but he'd never wear that badge the same again. Not with those red letters scorched into his memory. For Dre, that's what it had always been about. Not for a crew, not for turf, not for some vague revolution. This was for one boy, one name, one bullet too many. And now, from police headquarters to gas station counters, everyone knew there would be no peace until the debt was paid in full. And the tab was still wide open. By day, replayed the role flawlessly. Button-down shirts, spotless sneakers. He ran youth programs at the community center, led resume workshops, coached teens through college applications. Clipboard in one hand, a warm, trustworthy smile on his face. Parents thanked him. Teachers asked him to guest speak. The city even spotlighted him in a local heroes segment, complete with a photo of him shaking hands with a councilman. But no one ever looked deeper. No one questioned why his phone stayed silent during meetings, or why he always left without saying goodbye. Reap's daylight hours were pristine, predictable, almost saintly. But when night fell, the clipboard disappeared. The button-up was replaced by black hoodies and quiet purpose. The mask came off. Classrooms became trap houses. After-school talks became midnight strategy sessions. Each hour the city thought he spent saving lives. He spent dismantling the systems that endangered them. And he was good at both. Living a double life wasn't new for Reap. He'd split himself in two since he was a teenager. Half peacemaker, half predator. That balance made him untouchable. Now, it made him the most dangerous man in Detroit. Because no one saw it coming. The city's watch lists were cluttered with familiar names. Old hitters, retired legends, corner commanders. But Reap? He was never at the top. He didn't show off. He didn't post photos. He didn't flash cash or flex. He moved in silence. And every good deed in daylight earned him freedom to move through the dark. He used that freedom with precision. At the youth center, he spent his afternoons helping a teen named Malik apply to trade school. Helped him rewrite scholarship essays. Practiced interview questions with him until Malik could answer them in his sleep. Stay focused, Reap told him. Don't get caught out there. Don't get pulled in. And when the sun went down, Reap met with Tasha and the crew in a back room wired with scanners and surveillance feeds. Trap houses turned war rooms. Laptops glowed. Maps stretched across tables. Every voice low. Every instruction clear. That same calm tone he used with kids? It turned surgical when he spoke to his team. No emotions. Just execution. He studied blind spots. Patrol patterns. Entry points. Escape routes. He built a citywide web of phantom crews, each one independent, each one coordinated. Like clockwork, like chess. To the public, Reap was a clean-cut mentor. To the phantoms, he was their general. The wall between those identities was steel reinforced. People started noticing odd patterns. Reap always left events 10 minutes early. Never posed for photos. Never gave interviews. No one could say where he lived anymore. Rumors spread. Some believed he'd gone legit. Others sensed he was working on something far bigger. But nobody could prove anything. Because Reap didn't leave trails. He left results. The city didn't realize the war was being led by a man whose face they'd printed on pamphlets, whose name echoed in school auditoriums, whose story they believed they owned. But Reap was never part of their narrative. He was rewriting his own. He was writing his own story. And as long as the city kept praising the version it saw in daylight, it would never notice the other half creeping in from the dark. until it was far too late. The backlash came fast. After Officer Daniels was found tied beneath the overpass, the department didn't wait. They didn't hold a press conference or draft a public statement. But the South Side felt the shift instantly. Marked cruisers swarmed the streets like vultures circling a fresh kill. Helicopters flew lower, rattling windows, stealing sleep from entire neighborhoods. Patrols doubled, then tripled. What began as routine presence escalated into open intimidation. Stop and frisks surged. Young men were lined up against brick walls just for walking home. Boys barely old enough to shave were cuffed on the curb for loitering in front of their own buildings. One wrong glance, one hoodie too low, one hand in a pocket too long. Enough to be slammed to the ground. Enough to be choked. Enough to disappear for a night without explanation. The message was clear. The city was slipping, and it would squeeze tighter until something snapped. Malik snapped first. 16. Phantom prospect. Honor roll dropout. Repa tried to keep him close, giving him small jobs at the center, nudging him away from the edge. Malik was sharp, tech-savvy, street-aware. He wanted more than to be another face in a mural. But that didn't matter to the officers who stopped him on 38th and Jefferson. He was walking home from the library, hoodie up against the cold, earbuds in. They said he matched a description. He didn't resist, but he didn't move fast enough either. By the time it ended, Malik was in an ambulance. Bloodied, a cracked rib, one eye swollen shut. The officers left behind no charges, no names, no reports. Just silence and a hospital bill. When Reep walked into that, and saw Malik's face, nothing inside him shattered. It calcified. He didn't ask questions, didn't raise his voice. He just stood there, hands deep in his coat pockets, staring at the bruises, at what was left of a boy he'd tried so hard to protect. The nurses gave him space. The staff didn't ask who he was. They already knew. Some were nervous. Others nodded quietly, like they understood what came next. Before leaving, Reep sat beside Malik and placed a prepaid phone next to his water cup. Malik didn't touch it. He didn't need to. He already understood. That night, Reep met with Tasha. No speeches, no anger, just the name of a new target and a quiet nod. Because now it wasn't just about Dre. They had touched someone else, someone younger, someone Reep still had hope for. And that changed everything. The police believed they were regaining control. What they didn't see was that every raid, every shove in a dark hallway, every boy left bleeding on the sidewalk was fuel. They weren't ending the resistance. They were feeding the fire. And Reep was keeping score. Every ounce of injustice added weight to a scale he was carefully tipping, a scale that would soon shift beyond repair. Every war has its architect. Reep had his. Her name was Tasha. She didn't fit the street profile. No flashy chains. No trash talk. No history on corners. Her weapons were quieter. 3 burner phones, a laptop, and a mind engineered like a machine. If Reep was the surgeon, Tasha was the scalpel. She operated from a back room in an abandoned trap house disguised as a boarded-up front. Inside, it pulsed with blue light and humming hardware. Her battlefield was digital, and she was drawing the blueprint for a revolution no one would see coming. From the outside, the building looked abandoned, boarded-up windows, chipped paint, a mailbox dangling off its hinges. But inside, it was alive. The walls were lined with insulation, soundproofed to trap secrets. Folding tables held rows of hardware, and wires snaked across the floor like arteries. The only illumination came from cool LED strips and the unblinking glow of 3 monitors that never went dark. Police radio frequencies, GPS tracking, live dispatch logs, and license plate camera feeds pulsed across the screens. Tasha had cracked them all open, tapped directly into the city's nervous system. Every time a cop keyed their mic, she heard first. But she wasn't just listening. She was hunting. The next name on the list came from her personal archive of corrupted badges, Detective Walters. A 20-year veteran with a personnel file that should have ended his career years ago, if anyone had been looking. Tasha sifted through his internal affairs records like she was building a playlist. Misconduct complaints, tampered evidence, informants who flipped and then disappeared, Dozens of wrongful arrests swept quietly under the rug. Most of it never saw daylight, resolved with settlements, charges dropped before trial, headlines carefully avoided. But the worst of it? He targeted kids, teenagers barely out of school, boys like Dre, labeled, arrested, erased, stuck with records they couldn't escape. Tasha dug deeper. Walters had a pattern. Off duty, he hit the same dive bar on 12th Street 3 nights a week. Sat in the same corner booth. Light beer. Darts. No backup. No security. Just routine. She didn't need to tell Reap what to do. She sent the file. A few nights later, at 11:14 p.m., Walters left the bar. His car waited across the street under a busted street lamp. He never reached it. Two figures emerged from the alley. No words. No noise. They moved fast. By the time the last dart hit the board inside, Detective Walters had vanished. By sunrise, every major newsroom in the city had received a video file. No watermark. No narrator. Just a raw, direct-to-camera confession. Walters, pale, sweating, exhausted, confessed to it all. Names. Cases. Dates. He admitted to planting evidence in over 30 arrests. Some of those men were still locked up. Some had their lives destroyed. He named supervisors who signed off, judges who looked away, union leaders who buried complaints. No edits. No cuts. No spin. Just truth. The badge he once wore? Delivered in a manila envelope to the mayor's office that same morning. The city didn't explode. It collapsed. Reporters stormed precincts with cameras and questions. Protesters gathered at the courthouse, not waving signs, but holding lists, names of those wrongfully framed. Civil rights groups demanded immediate releases. Defense attorneys flooded the courts with appeals. By noon, a state investigation had launched. And Walters? He vanished. Some said he skipped town. Others believed he was in hiding. But no one really cared. His legacy had already been dragged into the light and burned to ash. And it hadn't taken a protest, or a riot, or a headline to do it. It had taken a girl with a laptop, a USB stick, and a name no one remembered, until it was too late. The city was beginning to understand. The ghosts they thought were buried were now behind the wheel. By dawn, chaos was trending. The leaked video dominated every network, every timeline, every screen. Anchors fumbled their scripts, stumbling over the confession. Legal analysts were brought in to clean up, but couldn't keep up. Social media detonated. Clips of Walter's breakdown flooded the internet, edited into reels, synced with music, sliced into hashtags, played on loop. For Dre, one boy, one bullet too many. And now, the reckoning had a rhythm and a soundtrack. There was no walking this one back. Walters hadn't just confessed to planting drugs, guns, and falsifying reports. He had laid it all out. The dates, the locations, the people who knew and stayed silent. 31 names. 17 still in uniform. A handful in leadership. 2 who'd once signed off on his promotions. By the time the city caught its breath, the fire had already spread. That afternoon, Walter's badge arrived at the mayor's front desk, tucked inside a plain manila envelope. No return address. No message. Just the badge itself, bent clean in half like someone had snapped a spine. The mayor canceled his entire schedule. Internal Affairs scrambled to frame a response. A statement was issued within hours claiming the department was shocked and deeply troubled. But no one was buying it. Not when victims of Walter's false arrests were already speaking up. Some had served years behind bars. Others had lost jobs, scholarships, families, entire futures derailed. Now they had receipts. Lawyers flooded in like sharks, smelling blood. Civil suits piled up by the hour. Activists demanded full audits. Protesters surrounded City Hall, silent this time, holding simple signs with one word on them. Dre. That name had become more than a name. It was a banner, a code, a verdict. Inside the department, morale collapsed. Officers stopped making eye contact in locker rooms. The union president skipped his scheduled press appearance. Rookie cops called out sick. Veteran detectives began clearing out their desks, quietly hedging bets on how far the fallout would reach. Even the police chief looked different now. Less polished, less confident, weighed down. He stood in front of reporters, and talked about transparency, trust, reform. But not once did he say Dre's name. He couldn't. Saying it meant tracing the fire back to where it all began, with a boy who never made it home, and a lie told without any footage to prove otherwise. Reap watched it all from the trap house, standing behind Tasha, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the news crawl. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. This wasn't about theatrics. It was about control, about pulling strings so subtly the puppet doesn't realize it's dancing until the applause starts. Walters had been the loudest ghost, but he wouldn't be the last. The phantom stayed quiet. No posts, no messages, no celebrations. They understood the weight of silence. Real power wasn't about being feared. It was about making the city doubt its own grip, forcing it to wonder, how deep does this go? They didn't need to answer. They just had to let the question linger. And it did, long enough to rattle courtrooms, precincts, and back offices. Long enough to make top brass flinch every time an elevator door slid open. The truth was out now. And truth, once spoken, doesn't crawl back into the dark. Not when it's backed by names, records, and scars. Walters was exposed. The machine had lost one of its gears. And the system, for the first time in a long time, didn't know how to keep moving. It began with a leak. Not a headline. Not a bang. Just a single PDF quietly forwarded to a journalist known for burning bridges. It detailed internal memos, dates, badge numbers, and explicit instructions from command. Withhold or disable body cams during escalated civilian encounters. The documents were labeled temporary field guidance. 3 supervisors had signed off. All 3 had ties to Dre's case. Within hours, the leak was everywhere. The headline hit like a slap. Detroit PD ordered body cam suppression before teen's death. No spin could fix that. No statement could unring that bell. The city had heard the truth. And now, it couldn't pretend it hadn't. The city had reached its breaking point. Inside police headquarters, the walls, once pulsing with command and confidence, now echoed with disarray. In the briefing room, voices dropped to whispers, but the tension was deafening. Some officers demanded immediate internal reviews. Others simply stopped showing up. One detective walked into his captain's office, dropped his badge on the desk, and walked right back out without a single word. The swagger was gone. Officers who once patrolled with unchecked authority now moved in tight clusters, heads low, eyes avoiding the public. Patrols ran behind schedule. Radio transmissions grew shorter, incomplete. The system was unraveling, thread by thread, like a uniform worn down to the seams. And then, the whistleblower stepped forward. A mid-level tech specialist, her hands trembling as she faced the cameras, her jaw locked in grim resolve. She was responsible for managing body cam footage. And now, she was confirming what the city feared most. Several body cams tied to Dre's case hadn't glitched. They hadn't malfunctioned. They'd been manually disabled before the traffic stop even happened. The silence in the press room was surgical. One reporter dropped a pen. Another forgot to breathe. The specialist continued, naming the officers. She read login IDs, timestamps, printed access logs, verified and time-stamped. Held them up like evidence in a trial no one could walk away from. Watching from a secure room, the chief of police turned pale. By nightfall, the dominoes began to fall. The deputy chief resigned. 3 supervisors were placed on indefinite leave. A dozen officers were suspended. And by morning, federal agents arrived, badges, subpoenas, laptops, and suits in hand. They didn't knock. They walked in with a list. Outside, protesters returned. But this time, they weren't met with riot shields. No tear gas. No barricades. Just a crowd of faces demanding names, accountability, and irreversible change. Dre's name was no longer a cry for justice. It had become evidence. A truth that had pushed through every lie and crack in the concrete. News coverage shifted. No longer focused on retaliation or unrest. Now, they talked about systemic corruption, buried complaints, patterns of misconduct, and decades of silence. Dre's face, once reduced to a hoodie in a headline, now appeared on murals, T-shirts, and the covers of national magazines. The city wasn't spinning the story anymore. It was struggling to survive it. And Reap? He stayed in the background, watching the unraveling from a distance. This wasn't victory. It was execution. The plan had never been to cause chaos. It was to expose the rot. And now, that rot was impossible to ignore. The streets had gone quiet, not in defeat, but because the first moves of the war had already landed. The Phantom campaign was never built on bullets. It was built on exposure. And exposure echoed louder than any gunfire. Dre didn't have a voice the night they stopped him. Now, the city couldn't stop hearing him. And the ones who made that possible never needed to say a word. The house looked smaller than Reap remembered. Paint peeling, gate hanging loose on rusted hinges, porch leaning harder than it had last winter. But the lights were on. Always were. Miss Taylor kept them burning like a lighthouse, just in case. Whether someone came home or didn't. Reap parked a block away. He always did. Not out of fear, but out of respect. She didn't need people knowing her son had shadows that followed him. He carried 2 bags. One with groceries, greens, rice, chicken, medicine. The other held something heavier. The kind of weight that doesn't show in the daytime, but stains everything at night. She opened the door before he could knock. She always knew. Mothers like her didn't need doorbells. They had radar built from pain. She didn't ask questions. She just stepped aside. The living room hadn't changed. Same faded floral couch. Same photo of Dre on the mantel, smiling at 16 with crooked teeth and no idea how short his road would be. Reap looked at the picture for a second too long. His mother saw. She offered him tea. He nodded, sat down, and listened to the creak of the floorboards, the kettle's hiss, and a gospel hymn playing low on the radio. And for a moment, the war paused. But only for a moment. When she came back with the tea, she didn't hand it to him right away. Instead, she sat across from him, held his gaze, and said one thing. Whatever you're doing, Marcus, don't lose your soul. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a plea. It was a warning, wrapped in love, shaped by experience. She didn't know the details. She didn't have to. She had seen enough. The headlines, the whispers, the fractures in a city that only seemed to care when the ground cracked wide open beneath it. She knew her son, knew he wouldn't let Dre's death be buried quietly. But she also knew what revenge could do to a man's spirit, how it started as fire in the chest and ended as ash in the hands. Reap didn't respond. He didn't lie. He just looked down at the tea. Steam curled upward like smoke from a barrel. They sat in silence. 2 generations bound by the same pain, each carrying it in different ways. One had lost a son. The other was becoming something unrecognizable just to make sure that loss meant something. Before he left, Reap placed the groceries on the counter and kissed her forehead. She held his hand a moment longer than usual. A quiet goodbye between storms. Outside, the wind had picked up. The sky darkened to slate. The street was nearly empty. Just a stray dog and a newspaper skittering across the curb. Reap walked the way he came, slow, steady, never once looking back. His mother watched from behind the curtain until he disappeared around the corner. Then she turned off the radio, blew gently on her tea, and prayed. Not for justice, but for whatever pieces of her son were still left to save. Lieutenant McNeil lived in a downtown condo built like a fortress, glass walls, private elevator, 24-hour security. The kind of place designed to shut the world out. He liked it that way. Above the noise. Above the chaos. Above accountability. He hadn't been on the scene the night Dre died. He hadn't fired the weapon. But he signed the paperwork. Closed the file in 48 hours. No questions asked. And, until recently, he hadn't lost a wink of sleep over it. But then the strange things started happening. A late-night knock. No one there. The elevator stopping on the 15th floor, vacant for months. A cab waiting outside, one he never called. At first, McNeil chalked it up to stress. The media frenzy. The crumbling department. Maybe even guilt. Though he'd never admit that out loud. He poured himself another drink. Double-locked the door. Scheduled a home security upgrade. Then he opened the fridge. Sitting on the top shelf, nestled between bottled water and old pasta, was a phantom mask. Black. Trimmed in gold. No note. No threat. Just presence. McNeil froze. Left the fridge open for nearly a minute. Staring at it. He finally grabbed a napkin, scooped it up, stuffed it into a plastic bag, and tossed it down the trash chute like that could make it disappear. But it was already too late. That night, he didn't sleep. Every creak in the floor, every flicker in the hall light, every gust of wind outside became a signal. He moved a chair beneath the doorknob, slept with the lights on, called an old contact in internal affairs, whispering about temporary relocation. But running wouldn't stop what was already coming. Because McNeil wasn't just a name on the list. He was the last one. The man who signed off on Dre's death like it was just another routine clearance. And now the ghosts he chose to ignore had knocked, softly but unmistakably, on his door. From that day forward, fear sat with him. Every hour, every night, tighter and closer. And it wasn't going anywhere. He started leaving work early, skipping meetings, dodging cameras, avoiding the spotlight like it burned. He stopped driving himself, began checking under his car every morning, hired private security to guard the halls of his building. But none of it stopped the one thing he feared most. Silence. It wasn't a hit he feared, not a warning, not even violence. It was the waiting, the knowing that something was coming, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Lieutenant McNeil was being dismantled, not with bullets but with dread, not in a single blow, but over time, inch by inch, because Reap understood something few ever did. The most powerful weapon wasn't a gun. It was a clock, and McNeil could hear it ticking in every hallway, every whisper, every moment of stillness. Ticking toward zero. It happened without sound. No alarms. No broken glass. No forced entry. Just stillness. The kind that doesn't belong in a building made for chaos. They found him early Monday morning. Lieutenant McNeil, seated at his desk, slumped slightly to one side, eyes open but gone. No signs of struggle. No blood. Just the unmistakable stillness of a man who would never get up again. On his desk was a single USB drive. Black plastic. Gold trim. No label. No fingerprints. Within the hour, the building was cleared. Bomb squad searched for explosives. Forensics swept every corner. Security footage was pulled. Keycard logs reviewed. Nothing. He had been completely alone. Alone with the one thing he could never outmaneuver. The truth. Later that day, news outlets across the city received identical emails from anonymous senders. Each email included the entire contents of that USB drive. What it held wasn't rumors. Not secondhand stories. Not grainy cell phone videos. It was footage. Clear. High resolution. Time-stamped. The full, unedited video of the night Dre Taylor was killed. Somehow it existed, and now the entire world could see it. The footage showed it all. Dre sitting quietly, hands visible on the steering wheel. An officer approaching, hand already hovering near his gun. The shouting. The panic. Dre reaching, not for a weapon, but for his license already resting on the dashboard. Then, the first shot. The second. Dre's body slumped across the door. No resistance. No threat. Just fear. Confusion. Then silence. The audio was worse. One officer muttering a curse after pulling the trigger. Daniel shouting. He didn't have anything. Briggs whispering about making it clean. Then nothing. The footage was the final nail. There were no press releases. No spin. No waiting. Within an hour, the footage went viral. National news networks played it on a loop. Social media exploded. Politicians scrambled for cover. Protesters returned to the streets, not just in Detroit, but in cities across the country. In every place where a name like Dre was still etched into sidewalk concrete. By sunset, the governor called for a full federal investigation into the Detroit Police Department. The police chief resigned. No questions taken. Briggs and Daniels weren't suspended this time. They were arrested. Federal agents walked them out in handcuffs. Faces blank. Hands trembling. For the first time, the system didn't go on defense. It began to collapse. Dozens of closed cases tied to body cam tampering were reopened. Prosecutors stepped down. Whistleblowers came forward. Files long buried in basements were brought into the light. And through it all, Dre's name never left the headlines. His mural, once tucked in a quiet alley on the south side, became a national symbol. His mother stood silently beside the mayor during a press conference. He offered a public apology. She didn't speak. She just stood, tall, unshaken, while the city tried to make amends with words that came far too late. Reap didn't attend the ceremony. Instead, he stood on a rooftop overlooking downtown, hands deep in his coat pockets, eyes fixed on the skyline, now glowing with flashbulbs and echoing with protest chants. The war wasn't officially declared over, but it had been won. Not because they pleaded for justice, because they took it quietly, precisely, and completely. And now, all that remained was the uneasy silence of a city trying to rebuild from ashes it never imagined would burn. Detroit didn't collapse all at once. It fell apart in fragments, like a tower buckling under the weight of its own lies. Within 72 hours of the footage release, federal agents descended on multiple precincts with search warrants in hand. Hard drives were seized, lockers emptied, senior officers were escorted out, under the watchful eyes of the very subordinates they once commanded. A new interim police chief was hastily sworn in, standing before the press with a shaking voice and hollow promises of transparency and reform. But his words landed like dust. The public wasn't interested in promises. They wanted accountability. Briggs and Daniels were indicted, second-degree murder, falsifying official documents, conspiracy to obstruct justice. Walters, still missing, was placed on a federal watch list. As for Lieutenant McNeil, though his death was ruled a cardiac event, the whispers in City Hall told a different story. Something earned. The justice system, long protected by political favors and union shields, was suddenly exposed. Judges recused themselves. Prosecutors stepped down. Defense attorneys flooded the courts with motions for retrials and dismissals. Over 100 wrongful convictions linked to corrupt officers were pushed to the top of the docket. And for the first time in years, people believed justice might actually be served. But it wasn't just the police department that cracked. City officials who had quietly approved bloated law enforcement budgets were now grilled on live television. Audits of oversight boards revealed that most civilian complaints had been rubber-stamped into silence. Community leaders demanded more than reform. They demanded dismantling. The governor launched a special oversight task force. The Department of Justice opened an independent investigation. A city once thought too tired to care had become the epicenter of a national reckoning. And at the heart of it all was Dre Taylor. His name was etched into courthouse steps, printed on billboards, painted on school walls. Celebrities posted tributes. Activists marched beneath banners bearing his face. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was a movement. When the city offered his mother a financial settlement, she turned it down. Instead, she asked for something that mattered. A foundation in Dre's name, not funded by donors, but built by the very city that failed him. She demanded scholarships, legal support for families, a civilian review board with real power. And this time they listened, not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. The media couldn't control the story anymore. It had grown beyond their reach. It belonged to the streets now, to the people who had watched Dre bleed, to the voices long silenced, and to the shadows that had forced the city into the light. No one mentioned the phantoms by name, but everyone felt them. Every reform, every resignation, every conviction overturned traced back to a war fought not with chaos, but with clarity. Not with bullets, but with precision. Reap and his crew didn't aim to destroy the system. They aimed to expose it, to crack it open until it collapsed under its own corruption. And it worked. The city offered apologies. But Reap wasn't looking for forgiveness. They were after survival. And survival now meant one thing: real change. The kind that doesn't come from press conferences or polished speeches, but from truth carved out like a tumor. Dre's story ended on a sidewalk. But what it started, that was just beginning. But Dre Taylor's name would never be buried again, because the system didn't just collapse. It was taken down, and everyone knew who did it. No more messages. No more bandanas beneath overpasses. No more viral clips or mass silhouettes. Just silence. After the system fell, the phantoms didn't retreat. They disappeared into stillness. Not hiding, just finished. Their mission was complete. The ones who needed to fall had fallen. The ones who protected them were either gone, exposed, or too afraid to step back into the light. The retaliation stopped, not out of forgiveness, but because the job was done. The war had always had an endpoint, and they had reached it. On the South Side, life didn't magically improve. Poverty didn't vanish. Violence didn't evaporate. But something shifted, a deeper current, one made of fear, the kind that had always flowed downhill, had turned. Now, when the police cruised through, they hesitated. They looked first. They moved slower. They stayed seated longer before opening the door. Because even in peace, they remembered what silence had cost them. Reap faded from the headlines. No photos. No warrants. No confirmation. Only whispers. Rumors that lived in barbershops, corner stores, and porch steps. Some said he left the city. Others swore he never had. That he still walked the neighborhoods, hood up, eyes low, no crew. Still watching. But those who paid attention knew where he went. Months later, they saw him, standing in front of a mural on 7th and Alberta. Dre's face, painted in full color, hoodie up, eyes soft, a halo of golden yellow behind his head like stained glass. Around the base, kids had signed their names in marker, some in cursive, others with an X. Reap stood there for a long time. He didn't move, didn't speak, both hands in his pockets, watching the sunlight touch his brother's face. A group of kids passed on their way home from the youth center. One boy slowed, looked up and nodded. Reap nodded back. He didn't have to. The streets already knew. There would be no statues, no holidays, no parades. But the city had learned something. Justice doesn't live in press conferences or courtroom monologues. It lives in what comes after. And what followed Dre Taylor's death was silence. A silence earned. A silence claimed. A silence that whispered, "You may have killed one of ours, but now you'll never forget his name." Thank you for watching. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories that matter.